Welcome back. A UN report released in October this year estimated the world will need to spend $310 billion a year by the year 2035 to prepare for higher sea levels, hotter days and other conditions of a warmer atmosphere. And according to the UN's Adaptation Gap report, this is roughly 12 times the amount now spent on annual climate adaptation efforts. Well, joining us today to discuss these findings is Anne OLHOFF, Director of the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Centre. And thanks for joining us and thanks for doing this to highlight such an important issue and matter. UNEP's Adaptation Gap report 2025, titled Running on Empty, says the world will need 310 billion US dollars. Even in fact, that could stretch up to $365 billion per year by the year 2035 for these adaptation efforts. As we've said, that's roughly 12 times the current amount that's being spent. What is driving this massive gap, Anne?
Well, first of all, I think what we need to see is that the biggest driver is that we're continuing to increase emissions of greenhouse gases. So that's basically continuing to drive up global warming. UNEP also released its annual emissions gap report earlier this year, which basically shows that we're right now headed for up to 2.8 degrees of global warming over this century. And even if countries do everything that they pledged to do in their new climate plans, we'll still see global warming way beyond 2 degrees. So we're already close to 1.5 degrees of global warming, and we simply see that the impacts are accelerating. So while we do see that adaptation finance flows, both from public and private sources, have grown over the past decade, they are simply outpaced by the adaptation needs in light of escalating climate change risks and impacts. Furthermore, I also think there's been a lack of recognition of the importance of integrating climate change, both in mitigation and adaptation, into national development policies.
Well, as we speak of that, recent extreme weather events like the Category 5 hurricane in Jamaica, typhoons within Asia, in Vietnam and the Philippines, cyclones in India and Sri Lanka, and of course the recent floods that we've seen here on this part of the world, Malaysia and Thailand. All this show devastating human economic impacts of climate change. How do these events illustrate the urgency of scaling up adaptation efforts this moment, at this point of time, right now?
You're completely right. We've seen extreme heat, droughts, fires, floods, stronger hurricanes and typhoons, and they've all intensified and grown over the past decade. And unfortunately, it seems that they will get worse. And as we know, extreme events have devastating impacts on livelihoods, on food security, on displacement and migration. And they're continuing and increasingly also undermining livelihoods and development goals. So it's a vicious circle that must be broken. At the same time, we know that scaling up adaptation efforts work. We've seen huge improvements, for instance, in early warning and in coordinated disaster management that are making a difference. We've seen that the number of casualties from extreme events has declined, even though economic losses have increased. So that just points to the relevance and urgency of stepping up adaptation efforts.
And if we refer to the report, the international public adaptation finance from developed to developing countries fell from $28 billion US in 2022, then to $26 billion in 2023. In your opinion, why is this global support not keeping pace with what is obvious, the rising needs of parts of the world?
Of course, there are several reasons, and we should also note that a small decline in 1 year does not necessarily indicate a new trend of falling adaptation finance flows. But we do see, as I said, that the needs are simply escalating, and it's increasingly difficult for international public finance to keep pace with the increasing needs. And at the same time, unfortunately, we're also in a time right now where adaptation and development support generally is being cut in many countries, and that will only make it worse.
Well, with limited funding available, what should countries prioritize first? Is there a checklist Is there a priority list, something like a, like a blueprint that countries should try to refer to?
Well, it looks, of course, very different. It depends on the country context. But what we know for sure is that there's a strong connection between development and adaptive capacity and resilience. So, in general, good development with higher income, education, healthcare is essential for resilience. It's of course also important to keep safety for vulnerable and exposed populations. So early warning, cyclone-proof buildings and other infrastructure, nature-based solutions such as mangroves, and all of this can be important parts of the puzzle. The important thing is to increasingly integrate climate change into long-lived investments and into planning more generally.
And what is one key takeaway you hope policymakers and financial institutions will act on after reading this year's Adaptation Gap Report?
Well, I think we have a mounting evidence that adaptation should not be seen as a cost, but as simply as a smart investment. Adaptation and development goes hand in hand.
Well, thank you very much, Anne. That's all the time we have on this segment. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
Well, it's time to take that break. I'll be right back.